Whole, we have one item on the agenda, PSC Energize East Side FEIS Mitigation and Conditions Review. Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Council President and members of the Committee of the Whole. My name is Jennifer Hanny. I'm with Community and Economic Development. And I'm here tonight to read every word of these documents to you. No, seriously, this is a body of work. This pile of documents on the table represents the environmental impact statement for the Energize East Side project. And it culminates 3+ years worth of work by the partner jurisdictions which are involved in this, which is City of Bellevue, City of Renton, City of Kirkland, City of Redmond, and City of Newcastle. And I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of history and perspective, because you're probably saying, well, wait, you've come to us several times with EIS briefings, and I have. I've come to you on the Phase 1 back in 2016, the Phase 2 in spring of 2017, and now this is the final EIS, which is this 4-volume set. And just to let you know, all these words on all these documents fit on this tiny little thing right here, which I'll tell you at the end how you can get your very own copy, or I can get one for you. So thank you for having me tonight. This is an update on Puget Sound Energy's Energize East Side proposal, and we're going to provide information regarding the release of the final environmental impact statement, which occurred on March 1st of this year, just a couple weeks ago. In addition, we're going to let you know about the next steps in our own city's permit process. So as a recap, Energize East Side is Puget Sound Energy's proposal to construct a new 230 kilovolt electrical transmission line from Renton in the south to Redmond in the north, and a new substation called the Richards Creek substation adjacent to the Lakeside substation in Bellevue. The reason we have this proposal is PSE has projected that there will be a deficiency in transmission capacity and future electrical supply, and they want to provide the additional electricity for the growing East Side communities and also to improve grid reliability. And so rolling back, this isn't new. This idea was advanced several years ago, and in 2014, a community advisory group was formed, and Greg Zimmerman, our Public Works Administrator, served on that along with 23 other members of organizations and 4 HOAs and community groups. So there were 28 members that made up this community advisory group that considered a number of different alternative routes for this new transmission line. And there were many, many, many public meetings held throughout the jurisdictions back in 2014. Puget Sound Energy had about 18 routes that were being considered. 2 of the routes that were within Renton, one is the route that is still being studied, and there was another one that went along Lake Washington that was considered the lake line, and that was removed from consideration. So back in 2015, the Citizens Advisory Committee made a non-binding recommendation for 2 routes that would be further reviewed, and both of those recommended using the existing Puget Sound Energy easement, where we have existing Puget Sound Energy lines, but they are 115 kV, so half the kilovolts of this proposal. So the line, or the corridor that's being proposed, is 16 to 18 miles, depending on some of the alternatives that are in other areas like Bellevue. But it does begin at the Talbot Hill substation in Renton, and it extends to the Sammamish substation in Redmond. This project, because it was considered to have some potential for significant adverse environmental impacts, was subject to an environmental impact study under the state law that requires that we do environmental review. Because the application was filed with City of Bellevue, they were the lead on this project for considering the environmental impacts, and the partner cities, Renton, Newcastle, Kirkland, and Redmond, also were partner cities in conducting the EIS. So the environmental impact statement looks at the impacts of having no project, which means the existing line would remain, and what impacts could occur if the existing line remained and no improvements were made. And it also looks at the proposed alignment, which is these new 230 kV lines or kilovolt lines and a new substation. The impacts that are evaluated in the environmental impact statement and the measures to reduce or eliminate those impacts, those are called mitigation measures. Those can be as a result of construction, operation of the system. They can be just cumulative impacts, and they can also be impacts resulting from not having the project. So there are 11 different categories that were evaluated in this final environmental impact statement. And there were several areas that had no impacts, so they were not evaluated. But land use and housing was evaluated, and some of the measures that could be used to reduce impacts identified, which would be such as removal of trees or changing the land use pattern. For example, if the no impact alternative, if the no project alternative went forward, there would likely be a reduction in the amount of development and housing developed because there wouldn't necessarily be enough power it. But with the project, there's really no change in land use and housing. But in terms of the minor impacts identified, there are ways to diminish or eliminate those through mitigation, such as co-locating utilities, following the conditions of the individual city permits, undergrounding the line where it's possible, and undergrounding some of the distribution lines where possible. Scenic views and aesthetic environment. This is something where we spent a lot of time, and this is where the project has the potential to create additional impacts. So I've got a number of slides here where we look at the impacts to Renton in particular. So the corridor has a lot of topography. It has ravines and valleys, streams, views to the lake, views to Bellevue and Seattle skylines, views to mountain ranges. And the views will be impacted because the pole heights are going to increase in most cases. There will likely be a reduced number of poles, but because there'll be like 2 lines on one pole versus 2 poles with 1 line each. So the heights will increase from, generally they're in the 55 to 60 foot range right now as an average, and they'll go up to about 90 or 100 feet. So in addition, there'll be trees that will be removed in Renton. That's about 350 trees. And in other areas, there'll be quite a few more scenic impacts. But looking at a photo simulation, if you look at the top photo here, this is an existing condition that's along Monroe Avenue near Northeast 10th. And it shows the existing configuration of wooden poles that are what we call an H structure. And these are the existing 115 kV lines. Under the proposal to the south, this is a simulation of what it could look like. So the poles would be taller, and there would be fewer of them. That's a little tough to see here, but there would also be some tree removal. For example, the madrona tree in the foreground would be removed. Going up to the next photo, which is in the Liberty Ridge area. And this is just north of the Maple Valley Highway. This is on Glenwood Court. The existing poles right now are 50 to 70 feet tall, and the new poles would be about 75 feet. As you can see, the 2 H structures, 2 of the 3 would be removed and replaced with 1 of the single structures, and then 1 of the other structures would remain. And then this is a view down at from the Cedar River Trail, and it's really tough to see, but if you see the arrow that says existing lines, it's pointing to the existing overhead wires, and they're barely perceptible. And then you can see on the photo to the right that there's an existing pole structure that is kind of a lattice pole structure that you can see. So this is the only public recreation site where the scenic views may be impacted in Renton. There wouldn't be clearing on the Cedar River. The line height would be the same, but the poles would likely be taller, and the wire width would be a little bigger. So that might be perceptible. And I threw in this image just because as we're going through our conditional use permit process, it's something to think about. Instead of hiding facilities, maybe you want to decorate them or call them out in a different way. This is an existing pole that's in Bellevue right now. It's painted bright blue and it has some artwork on it that sort of celebrates it in the realm of, say, a gaswork park in Seattle. Instead of hiding the gasworks, they painted it up and fenced it off and used it as a way to showcase it. Okay, moving on to the next area that was studied, water resources. So within the study area, there are streams, there are wetlands, and there are groundwater considerations. And the impacts that would occur would mostly be during construction, but the impacts would be short-lived and could be reduced by following acceptable construction standards. In addition, following all the local regulations we have, like critical areas regulations, our shoreline master program, and wellhead protection. Plants and animals. Within Renton, there would be about 350 trees that would have to be removed within the corridor or trimmed. And this is about 57% of the trees that were surveyed in the 4-mile corridor in Renton. And this could be reduced, as I said, through trimming. But in addition, the mitigation would be to replant those trees either within the corridor in an acceptable receiving area, because we don't want the trees to interfere with the wires, or they could pay a fee in lieu. And going to this particular segment, this shows in colors, the blue shows where no clearing would occur, where 1 to 10 trees, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, and such would be cleared. And this gives a little bit more detail. Because you lose some trees, vegetation, you also lose some wildlife habitat, but nothing is considered to be to the point of it can't be diminished or eliminated in terms of the impact.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Can I just ask, can you remind me the main reason that we have to take out trees? I mean, I know a lot of the public's going to wonder whether lines are higher, so why would you need to take out trees to
Some
do
of it's to get in and actually construct.
Okay.
Some of the areas aren't readily accessible with the equipment that they need to get in and actually build the line. And a lot of it, like you saw the segment on Monroe, there are trees that are just going to be, they've grown to the point where they're growing up in the area where the lines would be.
Okay.
So it's to prevent an operational hazard.
Is there a wider corridor that's required for this taller line, or
So, no, it's all within the existing corridor, which, and I neglected to say we have representatives from PSE here tonight who could help us with that, but I believe it's a 100-foot in width throughout the corridor, so no, there's no additional
Okay.
easements or right-of-way needed
okay?
for this line.
Thanks.
Mr. President,
Yes, go ahead.
following that question, if some of the trees that are going to be removed are just only for access, are they going to replace some of those?
Yes. So many of those will be replaced, and what some of the jurisdictions are doing, and we haven't started these conversations yet, is developing a specific replanting plan for our city and what we want to see there. And so those are the kind of details we're going to get in with our specific permitting. What these documents do is to disclose all possible impacts and ways to diminish or eliminate those. So then each city is going to get into its own permitting process that has site-specific conditions of approval associated with it. So we'll really get down in the weeds.
Thank you.
Another area that was looked at had to do with greenhouse gases. And so when you remove trees, yes, I'm sorry.
Councilmember
You
Pavoni
made
has
a
a question.
statement earlier about a fee in lieu of, right? So how are the decisions going to be made, right? I mean, I could see a case where it would be a little easier just to pay the fee for everything and not replant. So what's going to be the deciding factor whether trees get replanted or a fee is paid?
It's a great question. So as part of our particular permit process, we have PSC's application in hand. We haven't yet routed it to staff for review, but we'll be including our arborists and forestry folks from community services and the planners and all the different groups will really look at it. They have the Renton tree inventory that was used as background on this. So we will really evaluate if we agree that the trees need to be removed, and we'll be relying on our urban forester and arborist to tell us whether they can just be trimmed.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Chip.
And if I could add just real briefly, the fact that we have a fee in lieu of program for trees doesn't mean there's going to be a loss in tree canopy cover in the city. It just means it won't happen at that location. So when we bring in monies for the fee in lieu of program, that goes into our urban forestry program, and we plant trees on city-owned properties, other public properties, so there's no net loss of canopy cover throughout the city.
And that's what I meant by receiving areas. So maybe there's a park area that needs more trees, but ultimately, the total canopy, as Chip said, will be remain, just not necessarily in its current location.
Okay.
Okay. So moving on, another area that was looked at is greenhouse gases. So when you do remove some trees, it does result in greenhouse gases. And so some of the ways to combat that are to limit the vegetation disturbance, plant trees to replace those that have been removed, and also to install special equipment at the substations. And this is what's called SF6 equipment that insulates and cools. It's a cooling medium at the substation so it doesn't let off additional heat. Okay, moving on to recreation. We have the May Creek Natural Area that's not affected. This is a photo from the May Creek Natural Area. But we're going to be looking very carefully during the city's permit review process at all of our recreation areas. We do have a map here that shows the corridor in a purple line, and it shows some of our open space and parks along the way. So it does cross through the Cedar River Natural Area, the Honey Creek Open Space, and Sierra Heights Park. And so we'll be paying particular attention there. But what we'll make sure is that recreation land is not converted to other uses. We'll again try to limit vegetation disturbance. We'll be notifying the schools, the private owners in advance of work within recreation areas. And I had a meeting today with Community Services to start a conversation regarding this as well. Another area that was kind of surprising was had to do with historic and cultural resources. And because human activity has occurred in this area in the Northwest for about 12,500 years, there are areas that, with the disturbance that could occur along the whole corridor, there could be some areas that would be protected. And the only site that was identified in Renton that is considered to be eligible as an historic property near the corridor is the Mount Olivet Cemetery. And there won't be any disturbance, but it was just worth calling out. Of note, and I think I mentioned this during one of the last briefings, the line itself is considered historic in some manner because it was built, when it was built back in the, was it the 40s? 1930s. It brought energy and electricity to the east side, and so it has some historical properties itself. So there'll be a lot of coordination with the state for historic resources that might be found along the way. And this is just an image of the two cemeteries that were identified that could have historic property or historic qualities, Mount Olivet and Greenwood, but there's just a view from Greenwood of the line. It's not affected. Okay. Then we get into the environmental health, electric and magnetic fields. And this is an area that the EIS spends a lot of time and a lot of paper discussing. What are the impacts to environmental health? And what's really kind of interesting, and this graphic that I'm putting up shows the route in Renton, and it shows that the electromagnetic field exposure, the existing is in blue and the proposed is in gold. And the 230 kV lines actually result in less exposure to electromagnetic fields than the existing 115 kV lines. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So the top shows in winter, I believe, and the bottom is in summer.
And that's probably because of distance from the lines? Is it because they're higher?
And I know that I have somebody here who can address that from PSC. I hesitate to go there, so
The key factors is the configuration of the conductors, the wires. And right now, they're basically on H-frames that are horizontal to the ground. There's no cross-canceling. You propose they're
I see.
vertical and you get cross-canceling.
I see. I see. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
In addition, one of the subjects that's come up over and over again has to do with the co-location of the existing electrical lines and the proposed lines with the Olympic pipeline and portions of the route. Within Renton, we only have about less than half a mile where that actually occurs, but trying to figure out how you prevent an accident during construction or during operation that could potentially impact the Olympic pipeline and other considerations were natural events like earthquakes that we have no control over. There were studies that we had to have done that looked at making sure there was not going to be a situation where the electrical current created corrosion of the pipeline. So this was
Right.
really involved, and I don't want to try to explain the science of it all, but I would be happy to have an expert come and explain that to you. So there are a number of mitigation measures to help try and keep everybody as safe as possible, and it's generally not considered to be more dangerous. Okay, moving on to economics. Economics is an issue that is not required as part of the environmental impact statement, but it was looked at here in an effort to try and quantify things like tree removal. And so it was interesting because it looked like it was about $8,500 a year in reduced removal of pollutants and reduced stormwater runoff through the tree removal. So it wasn't considered to be a big hit economically, at least in Renton. And finally, the last element of the environment considered was earth. And there are areas that are prone to seismic and sliding. With the existing line and the proposed line is going in those same areas, we would just have to really make sure we have geotechnical considerations covered both during construction and operation, and make sure that we are looking for signs of failing earth before we allow a new pole to go in a certain area. Okay, pole designs. This is kind of a big thing. The poles are typically going to be either one double circuit monopole, as you saw in some of those photo illustrations, or they'll be, in Renton, there'll be two single circuit monopoles. So they're shown here, and they might have different finishes. They might be the naturally weathering ones that turn more of a kind of a weathered steel look, or they might be painted. What this shows is that the pole heights are generally 83 to 95 feet with these. And then there are atypical situations where for example, where the line has to cross a river or where it crosses the existing Seattle City Light corridor. And in that case, where it crosses Seattle City Light here in Renton, there'll be shorter poles that are 50 feet tall because they'll cross under. But these atypical designs are shown here. There might be two single circuit monopoles or one double circuit monopole, but those are generally around 100 feet. So this graphic is specific to Renton, and it shows that the existing poles within Renton are typically, say, 55 to 60 feet tall. They can be as tall as 93 feet in some places right now, but they're going to be proposed at between 50 and 118 feet throughout the corridor. And then the map shows where the different pole types are being used and in what application. Okay, so where are we? Where are we in this EIS process? We started back in 2015. We had the draft Phase 1 environmental impact statement that considered a range of options, including the proposal to build the new corridor. We had the Phase 2 that looked at the no construct alternative plus the proposed, and that's in the middle here. And now we have the final, which builds on all this, expands in more detail, and responds to all the comments we received along the way. So this really thick piece here, and the one below it, those are just the comment letters and the responses to those, and every comment has been responded to. As I said, this document altogether is the environmental impact statement for the project. It was issued on March 1st, and now, because it's been issued, it allows the cities to start actually processing permits for the Energize Eastside project. So PSE has submitted its permits for its conditional use permit application to the city of Renton. We will soon be starting our public comment period and sending out a notice to anyone who lives within 300 feet of the corridor within Renton. It's a 4-mile corridor. We'll be asking people to please let us know what their concerns are. With a conditional use permit, you look at the specific project and you decide what conditions should be applied specific to that project and in specific locations. So it doesn't rely on just the elements that are the elements in the development regulations within our code. It allows us to go beyond that and say, boy, in this area, we really need to have this condition to make sure the project's acceptable. Or that's if we approve it and it's approved with conditions. We could also deny the project. But I just want to let you know that that permit process will be commencing very shortly. And with that, that is your update on the
Any questions from
Energize Eastside.
council?
I have one.
Go ahead.
So with the conditional use permits, it's a long segment of real
It is.
estate that we're gonna be working on. How many permits do you anticipate we'll have? I mean, how is it gonna be spread out? And are you gonna look at each one individually for the conditions, or is it gonna be, are they gonna be grouped together?
So we are going to be looking at the project as a whole, but we'll probably have to break it into different segments for consideration of different impacts. We haven't really crossed that bridge yet, to be honest. But it will be complicated because we've got, probably several thousand people we're going to be contacting and asking them to become parties of record so we can let them know when we do have a public hearing and so that they can be involved. But the project itself, the entire 16-mile corridor, is going to be built in 2 phases, from south to approximately Bellevue and then from Bellevue north. And the south to Bellevue will be the first segment from Renton to Bellevue.
So we're kind of setting the tone a little bit for the other cities that are gonna do theirs later.
Not necessarily. Everybody has their permit application that's been filed. It's just a matter of who gets it through their decision-making process first. In addition to a conditional use permit with us, we'll have a shoreline exemption permit for crossing above the Cedar River. And then we'll have some potential for some modifications and things. But we group everything in one bundle, so we don't piecemeal it out.
Are there any other questions from council? Seeing none, we are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
We'll reconvene at 7 o'clock for the council meeting.
And my microphone was off, so I apologize.